This is a Roll to Hit Gaming First Look. In this video, we begin our game showcase. The first look covers components, rules, and setup. It is designed to give you a quick introduction to a game you might have interest in. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Let's head into the game room for your Roll to Hit Gaming First Look host.
Welcome back. I'm Lucas from Roll to Hit Gaming, and today we'll take our first look at Pandemic Iberia. This retheme of Pandemic is set in the year 1848, and players are working to perform research on malaria, typhus, the yellow fever, and cholera. You'll travel by carriage, by boat, or train, distributing purified water and developing railways in order to try and research a way to treat these terrible diseases. Let's get to the table and take a look. We'll start by looking at the contents of Pandemic Iberia's Limited Collector's Edition. There are 7 different colored player pawns and 7 matching character role cards. First, the Agronomist, which can spend actions to place purification tokens and place additional tokens while purifying water. The Politician, which can distribute player cards to other players or swap out their city cards for discarded city cards. The Nurse, which carries with them a prevention token and prevents cities adjacent to the token from being affected. The Railwayman, who can place 2 railroad tiles when performing the Build Railroad action and can carry another pawn with them when they move by train. The Royal Academy Scientist, who can purify water more effectively and spend actions to peek at and rearrange the top 3 cards of the player deck. The Rule Doctor, who removes an additional disease cube from an adjacent city when performing the Treat Disease action. And finally, the Sailor, who doesn't use city cards when traveling by ship and can carry along another player's pawn as a passenger when traveling by ship. There are 60 total player cards, 48 city cards matching the locations on the board, 15 event cards which can be used at any time to modify the rules of the game or provide a bonus to the players, and 6 epidemic cards. There are 48 infection cards matching the city locations, 5 player reference cards with information on front and back, 4 disease cards which are used in the Historical Diseases Challenge, 1 Order of Play card for use with the Influx of Patients Challenge, 4 wooden hospital markers matching the region colors, 96 wooden disease cubes, 24 in each of the 4 colors, 4 wooden research markers, 1 of each color, 1 wooden infection rate marker, and 1 wooden outbreak marker. There are also 14 cardboard purification tokens and 20 railroad tokens. Let's take a look at the turn structure and see how each action works. Each player turn is divided into 3 steps. First, a player will perform up to 4 actions. Then, draw 2 player cards. If you draw an epidemic as one of these cards, resolve its effects immediately. And finally, infect cities. Reference the infection rate tracker and draw that number of infection cards from the deck. Place 1 cube in each of the cities drawn. Let's take a look at the actions. The first set are movement actions. Players can move by carriage or boat, which allows a player to move their pawn from a city to another city connected by a brown line. Players can move by train from any city to any other city connected by a continuous chain of railroad tokens. Players can move by ship, which means to move from one port city to another by discarding a city card matching the color of the destination city. There are 6 other actions also available to players. First, a player can perform the Build Railroad action to put a railroad token on a line coming out of your current city. Players can build a hospital by discarding the city card that matches their current location. If the hospital token of that color is already on the board, move it to your current location. The Treat Disease action allows a player to remove 1 disease cube from the city you're in and return it to the supply. Players can share knowledge in 2 ways. Give a city card that matches the city you're in to another player, or take a city card that matches your current city from another player. Both players must agree and be in the same location to perform this action. Players can research a disease while at a city with a hospital. Discard 5 city cards matching the color of the hospital from your hand to research the disease of that color. Move the research marker onto that disease to show that it has been researched. A difference from classic Pandemic is that diseases cannot be cured in Pandemic Iberia. Once a disease has been successfully researched, new cubes can still be placed on the board during epidemics or infections. However, city cards matching the color of a researched disease can now be used to purify water in adjacent regions. Last, players may perform the Purify Water action in 2 ways. Discard a city card matching the color of a city in an adjacent region to put 2 tokens into that region, or discard a city card matching the color of a researched disease to put 2 tokens into any one adjacent region. Regions are a new concept for Pandemic Iberia. A region is defined simply as the areas of the board enclosed by brown lines. In this example, you can see several individual regions highlighted from the Pandemic Iberia board. Water purification is also a new concept for Pandemic Iberia. When players take the Purify Water action, they place purification tokens into regions. When a disease cube would be placed into a city adjacent to a region with purification tokens, instead of placing the new disease cube, remove one of the purification tokens. During the infection step, players will place disease cubes on locations drawn from the infection deck. When placing disease cubes, if a single location would have 4 cubes of the same color, instead an outbreak occurs. The disease cube is not placed on the drawn location, as a given location can never have more than 3 cubes of the same color. Instead, disease cubes of that color are placed on all connected locations. Each time an outbreak occurs, move the outbreak marker forward 1 space on the outbreak track. If this track reaches the final space, the players lose. Now, I'll unfold the board and show you how to set up for a 3-player game of Pandemic Iberia. Start by creating the supply. Place the 4 hospitals, the disease tokens separated by color, and the purification and railroad tokens somewhere near the board. Place the outbreak marker on the 0 space and the research markers on their indicated spaces along the bottom of the board. Place the infection marker on the leftmost space of the infection rate track. Place the infection deck on its indicated space near the infection track. Draw the top 3 cards. Place 3 disease cubes of the appropriate color on each of these locations. Place those 3 cards in the discard pile and draw 3 more. Place 2 cubes in each of these locations. Discard these 3 cards and draw 3 final cards. Place 1 disease cube on each of these locations. Discard these 3 cards as well, and you've now seated the board to begin playing. Shuffle the roll cards and deal 1 to each player. Players should take the matching player pawn of their color shown in the upper left of their roll card. Take the epidemic cards out of the player deck and set them aside for now. Shuffle the event deck and draw the appropriate number based on player count. For our 3-player game, we'll draw 5 events. Shuffle the drawn events into the player deck and deal starting cards to each player. For our 3-player game, each player begins with 3 cards. Finally, set the game's difficulty. This will determine how many epidemics are used. For our example, we'll play a standard game and use 5 epidemics. Separate the remaining player cards into equal size stacks matching the number of epidemics. Place 1 epidemic in each stack, then shuffle the stacks separately, placing one on top of the other. Do not shuffle the assembled player deck. It has been seeded and you are now ready to begin playing Pandemic Iberia. Players examine the city cards they have in their hands. The player with the city card with the earliest founded date will be the first player. Play proceeds clockwise from this player. As you'll notice, hospitals or research stations, as they were called in other versions of Pandemic, don't start the game on the board. So players determine their starting location by referencing the city cards in their hand. They choose one of these locations to begin the game, and if they've drawn no city cards, they can choose any location on the board. Once players have their pawns on their starting locations, play begins with the first player. As usual for Pandemic, a player can perform up to 4 actions on their turn. Our first player is the sailor, who's using the blue pawn. They'll move 1, perform 2 treat actions, and move a final space to Vigo. After performing 4 actions, players draw 2 player cards. Resolve any epidemics drawn. Then players reference the infection rate marker and draw the appropriate number of infection cards, placing 1 cube in each drawn location. Discard the drawn infection cards, and play proceeds to the next player. In our example, this is the railway man. He'll move 1 to Malaga, and then he'll use his special ability, which allows him to place 2 consecutive rail tracks from his starting location once per turn. While not necessary, railways allow you to move quickly across the board, as for 1 movement point you can remove along any section of a consecutive railroad track. For his third action, he'll move here, and his fourth will treat 1 disease cube. Draw 2 player cards. Draw 2 infection cards. And play proceeds to the next player. The rural doctor, our third player, treats an adjacent city when he performs the treat action. So he'll start by treating to remove 2 cubes from the board. Moving twice. And then he'll discard a blue card to place 2 purified water tokens into any region. Now, when a disease cube would be placed on any city adjacent to this region, instead remove a purified water token. He'll draw 2 cards to end his turn. And draw 2 infection cards. Play proceeds in this manner until players have either been defeated because they can't draw any more player cards, they're out of a color of player cubes, or they've reached 8 outbreaks. Or they're victorious by researching all 4 diseases. We didn't draw one on our sample turn, but let's dig through the player deck, find an epidemic, and show you how that works. When an epidemic is drawn, increase the infection rate marker 1 space. Draw the bottom card from the infection deck and place 3 cubes on that location. As you can see, we have 2 Purify Water tokens, so we would remove those first, leaving us 1 cube to place. Discard the drawn card, then shuffle the infection discard pile, putting it back on top, and then infect as normal to end the player's turn using the new infection rate. Before we conclude our first look, let's take a quick look at how the 2 variants for Pandemic Iberia work. The Influx of Patients challenge simulates the rush of patients into new fledgling hospitals in the 19th century Iberian Peninsula. During setup, use the normal rules with the following changes. Add the Influx of Patients challenge reference card over the play section of the board. Also, only 6 Purification tokens are available in the supply. Divide the remaining 8 tokens into 4 stacks of 2, placing a hospital on each stack. During play, building hospitals now has additional benefits. When you build a hospital, put the 2 Purification tokens that were underneath the hospital into the supply, making them available for use, and remove any disease cubes matching the color of the hospital from the city where you built it. The downside to building hospitals is that players must now move 1 disease cube towards each hospital each turn. This means that the hospitals can quickly become overrun with patients. After performing a player's 4 actions, but before drawing player cards, move the patient closest to each built hospital matching its color towards that hospital. When moving, patients will move the fastest way they can, which means they'll use railroads if it's the fastest means to reach the hospital. If moving a patient into a city causes it to have 4 disease cubes of the same color, it becomes overrun. When a hospital is overrun, players must move every patient of that color into a city adjacent to this hospital. After moving cubes out of the city with the overrun hospital, mark an outbreak on the outbreak track. Players win the Influx of Patients challenge by successfully researching all 4 diseases. In the Historical Diseases challenge, players form an experienced team to fight against more powerful diseases. Each disease now appears with a different terrible behavior, more dangerous outbreaks, more rapid infection, or harder to treat. During setup, shuffle the disease cards and randomly select 1, 2, 3, or 4 of them to play against. The more you select, the harder your game will be. Play as usual, but note the special effects of the historical diseases that are now in play. Black represents malaria, and when infecting with black, whenever you would put 1 black cube into a city that has no black cubes in it, add 2 black cubes instead. Red represents typhus, and if there's more than 1 red cube in a city, you must spend 2 actions to remove a red cube, meaning taking a city from 3 red cubes to 1 would require all 4 of a player's actions. Blue represents cholera, and when blue outbreaks, in addition to placing a blue cube in each city 1 connection away, place a blue cube in each city that is 2 connections away, if there are no cubes of any color there. And lastly, yellow represents yellow fever. When a yellow cube is placed in a port city, you must place a yellow cube in all adjacent port cities as well. Players win the Historical Diseases challenge by successfully researching all 4 diseases. This has been our first look at Pandemic Iberia. I hope you've enjoyed it, and hopefully this will help you decide if this is a game you might be interested in. Until next time, I'm Lucas. Have a great one.
Thank you for joining Roll to Hit Gaming for another First Look, where we go inside the box, through the rules, and onto the table. If you liked what you saw and want to see more, please click the like and subscribe buttons. Find us on Facebook and Twitter, and join us in the conversation in the comments below.